Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to host incredible researchers and professionals. As you know, we are here to understand who is South Asian in UK, and we are standing for PRISA's webinars, ongoing webinars that we attend every month. And in this session, we would like to know from your perspective, what is the lived experience of South Asians living in UK, not just from the theory perspective, but living with them and what you understood and what did you absorb. So I would like to introduce you Dr. Arif Azad. It's nice to see you. It's a
nice
pleasure.
to see you. Yes, thank you for inviting me and organizing this.
Thank you very much. I believe that you're a professional who have worked in the public sector and the professional life at the professor as an organization, international organization and government sector in the UK, and you have experience working with Europe and Middle East and South Asia. Yes. Thank you. We look forward to see your input. And Professor James Staples, we would be happy to see your your input on the leading research of identity and migration and expertise on how Asians live in here, especially with the co-hosting on migration menu. And dear Luke, our director, who is our anthropologist, who is the researcher and the consultant and expert in understanding the South Asian in the UK. So I would leave the platform for you. I would ask James to open your mic and we'll start. Just before we continue with our session, I want to give just a little bit of introduction about how we see South Asians. Obviously, we have a list of countries that is identified geographically where they are. But when they immigrate and come to UK and they want to integrate with the society, this integration and the sense of belonging started about 60 years ago. After the Second World War, we started to break this discrimination. On the paper is okay, but when it comes to the real life, it's another dilemma. And we want to work on this paradox, how to bring them together and how to help them to feel they're accepted and how we can present them with the society, the host society that for us is UK, and help them to integrate with these two both at the same time. But why do we need to do this? And who are these people, these migrants who come here and we want to help them? This is what we are going to discuss today. So James, would you?
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think Luke is going to give us some of the historical kind of background of migration into. I mean, I think, I suppose a caveat to begin with is that the work that we do on the migration menu in relation to our podcast, which has been about interviewing and spending time with really South Asian entrepreneurs and restaurateurs around West London, particularly in Southall, in Hayes, in the areas around the university. So in a sense, we're working very much with a particular group of people who have a particular set of experiences. So I think, just to throw that caveat in that we're speaking against that kind of background, rather than trying to speak for South Asians or the South Asian experience in general. I mean, I think, well, sorry.
I was also a good donkey meeting.
Oh.
Hi, would you close your mic, please?
Oh, sorry, I thought that was you, Huri.
No, sorry.
Asking me a question. So Luke, do you want to start by sketching in some of that stuff that we talked about in relation to this background to migration?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problem at all. Likewise, I think James's caveat is right there. This is what we're going to speak about today, and the position that we're speaking from is purely our experience in producing the podcast, which deals exactly with that kind of migration experience into the UK, which we do through food on the migration menu. But thanks for having me, and this is a wonderful webinar series that's been going on so strong over the last months. to give a kind of scaffold to the stuff that James is going to talk to a little bit more, I think that the starting point that kind of came out of the narratives of the people that we've been working with was this kind of the beginning of the story is the end of empire and the end of the Second World War, and the kind of need for the Commonwealth to come to the UK and rebuild the post-war economy. So Britain at that point had a very open position on inviting people from India, and the rights were there for people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, anywhere in the Commonwealth to come to the UK and work in transport, in the NHS, in local factories in particular where we work. There was the rubber factory and so on. And later at Heathrow, and this was the kind of first major kind of introduction of the Commonwealth on such a scale into the UK. But integration was imagined or discussed in these periods more about kind of economic integration rather than cultural and so forth. It was about keeping the country moving, but there were very few kind of structured supports and services at this moment to support kind of an idea of social belonging in the way that we might talk about it now. And then there was a kind of panic almost in the system, and so from the 1960s onwards you see this closing up, both in terms of immigration policy and legislation around it through 1962 and 1968, and it gradually restricted Commonwealth citizens from enjoying the rights they previously had to come to Britain, and it was kind of closing this door. But this also took place alongside rising racism and street level hostility, as well as kind of structural racism and institutional discrimination. So the result was a real sort of paradox. South Asian migrants were essential to Britain's everyday kind of functioning, but increasingly made to feel unwelcome in this area, in this era. And then of course the sort of the makeup of this migration shifted as well. So previously in the earlier stages it was men who were coming in, and then latterly families, and then also not just about sort of gender. Each group sort of integrated, or could be seen to sort of thought to be integrated slightly differently. So you would have people coming in to work in factories, or there would be integration and difference through kind of religious community, or institutions, or through education levels, or through navigating legal precarity as well. So amongst the entrepreneurs that we spoke to, one of the really kind of striking cohesive factors, especially amongst very successful South Asians living in this part of London today, was that it was very important that you came to the country with only £5 in your back pocket, and very little resources. But scratch the surface a little bit more, you see that in different phases of the earlier phases of and people did do amazingly from very sort of little resources. But how people are set up in the countries that they've come from at those particular moments has a massively influential factor on how they are able to integrate economically and position themselves in the UK economy at whatever period they kind of came over, which seems as a kind of common sense point, but it's one of those common sense points that often gets blurred in people's kind of retelling of their own life trajectories as well. So the changing shift of kind of South Asian emigre into the UK from male factory worker to family, to professional sector, to working in the civil servants, and then latterly you'd have the tech sector, especially around West London, and a more kind of managerial class. First generation focusing largely on stability and kind of community building. So this was about preparing food that was distributed internally amongst their community to then later setting up businesses. And then the second generation negotiating between kind of cultural inheritance and British social expectations. And then third generation hybrid identities, you know, kind of not one but both, kind of being explored and navigated daily. And then you have migration of people who have been able to position themselves into business or property ownership as the sort of post-colonial situation in the 50s and 60s changes, and the legal framework was around for them to be able to come. And then you have people, especially so for example, in the Sri Lankan Tamil community, who came over in the 70s and early 80s in larger numbers, who were part of a kind of migration and resettling into the UK as escaping trauma and violence. So that kind of the baggage of the past plays into how well one can and how one does integrate into a society at any particular moment. So that's kind of a very brief but and potted sort of sketch of the general picture as we found it through some of the narratives of the people that we'd spoken to. I mean, we spoke to people who had set up business after escaping youth insurrections in South Asia. We'd spoken to people who had migrated via Kenya and Uganda, and this sort of East African Indian experience, which is also, as they refer to themselves as the double migrant or the twice migrant, and that kind of experience was kind of incorporated into the narrative of self-making, that this is, you know, these hardships experienced twice is exactly the kind of stuff that built up the resilience to then go on and have a successful business and do it again, because they've had that experience before. They know that precarity and that work. It's very interesting kind of thing going on with that as well. So it's very layered over time. It's layered into different political experiences, both in the UK as policy legislation changed over the mid-20th century, as the social environment changed, as with the rise of racism, and it changed in the context of what was going on in South Asia as well, as there was much kind of integration through the unions of the factories, where pan-South Asian turbulence could be collectively dealt with in a new sort of collective South Asian demographic within the UK as well. So all of the things that are going on in South Asia and all of the things that are going on in Britain come together over these different periods of time, and they're all going to be kind of influencing this fragile notion of integration, and integration itself, I guess, like just as a sort of a final point, is a shift from what used to be kind of lauded celebration of multiculturalism. So multiculturalism in and of itself was once considered a kind of valuable thing, regardless of levels of integration. But now we've moved into this gradation of like how well one can integrate into society as being more important. And so that balancing that is still something that's kind of playing out at the moment. And we have found, sorry, I've probably gone on a little bit more here, but we have found through the podcast that food has been this, you know, phenomenal way to think about cultural connection, I guess we could say, rather than integration, that takes us once back to a kind of connection with heritage and place and belonging in very like visceral and bodily ways, and connection to this place, the UK. So maybe, James, this would be a good point for you to come in and say a bit more about kind of how you see food making those connections.
Yeah, well, I was thinking specifically or more generally about integration and this disconnect actually between, on the one hand, you have this kind of discourse which you see a lot, particularly now, about, you know, people who have come from elsewhere never being able to be fully English or fully British. So you have even, and at the highest levels of government. So you had Suella Braverman as the former Home Secretary, talking about how she could be British, but she could never be English, and those sorts of debates, which I think stood in real contrast actually to the restaurateurs and some other entrepreneurs that we interviewed. And again, we're talking about, I suppose, a particular sector or a particular group of people who have been quite successful, who have come from various places in South Asia, but who in some ways, surprisingly, or it felt initially surprisingly, I think during those interviews, had a more traditional perspective on Britishness or Englishness or whatever you might want to call it than, say, Luke or I did in answering them. They were very much pro the royal family, for example, very often pro, very interested in supporting the armed forces, in all of those things which come up in those discourses, which people who are coming in from outside are supposed to somehow stand separately from. I mean, one, for example, was a Gurkha, so perhaps that's not surprising, but whose family had fought for the British Army and saw himself very much in those kinds of terms. But there were others, and these were not necessarily things that came out from the interviews themselves, but came out as we followed them subsequently, through social media, through having those connections with them. One, for example, who had become chair of his local Conservative Party association. There was another, which at the time felt very surprising, who was a migrant, a first-generation migrant from India, who had stood as a candidate for the Reform Party in a local election. And I think one of the things that came across was actually that these things, which in some ways are seen as being very, very British in a way, to be very politically engaged, regardless of whether we might agree with those particular party positions, but which at the same time were very continuous actually with things that people had brought from the diaspora. So it wasn't that sense, which I think that we've talked about before in some of our discussions, about people losing some element of their self when they come to a new place. They need to become something else. In fact, I think for the guy who stood as a candidate for reform, it was actually very continuous when you look back at his life in the parts of India where he had grown up, where he had come of age. The Hindu nationalist party, the BJP, of which I suspect he was a member in India, very much reflected the kind of politics that you saw in Reform UK, for example. It was a different kind of nationalism, but those things somehow translated across. For the other guy who had become chair of his local Conservative Party association, again, it was about what he saw as being family values, about who he saw as supporting entrepreneurship and business, smaller state. So the very same kind of discourses that he would have had back in a very distant homeland were being recreated or reformed in particular ways here in the UK. And certainly it wasn't only the restaurateurs we met weren't all joining right-wing political parties, but they were joining community associations. They were joining things which both enabled them to continue the values, or what they saw as the values that they had brought with them to the UK, as well as becoming very much integrated in the UK system. And I think looked at from outside, if you didn't know some of that history from India or Nepal or Sri Lanka or wherever it might be, it's quite hard to understand how those things fit together. And I think the fact that, I mean, obviously we can't speak for other people. Luke and I can't speak for other people and can only, I mean, serve in a way through the podcast that we've created and through publications and so on, as a voice piece in some ways, or as a way of letting those people express themselves. But I think that we do, one of the things that we do bring to it, I guess, is having had that experience of, for example, in Luke's case, having done field work for a long time in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. I've spent time in rural coastal Andhra Pradesh, as well as in Hyderabad and in Mumbai. So you do get a sense of where those connections might be. I mean, I think the other thing that became quite apparent, obviously, I mean, again, it's a fairly obvious point that there wasn't one South Asian experience or even one Indian experience or Nepali experience when it's translated into migration, that you have these distinctions that arise from gender. For example, women often have very different kinds of experiences of migration than their male counterparts, and have different kinds of stories to tell. I mean, very few of the restaurateurs that we interviewed were women. And I think that in itself was telling, and that women had found other kinds of routes to integrate themselves into society, and again, often through food, through providing food services, from supper clubs to tiffin delivery services and those kinds of things, which were very much, again, about using skills and values, actually, that had come with them from an imagined homeland, well, a homeland either imagined or real, depending on which generation they were. But which also connected them in the UK, both to other people from what they saw as their communities from in the diaspora, but also often much more broadly than that as well. It was also about teaching and bringing other people in to share some of those elements of culture. So I guess to bring back to where Luke introduced food to begin with, or as he introduced me, I guess it's the way, food is a very good way actually of making those cultural connections. I mean, again, a fairly obvious point. It's seen as one of those, perhaps in some ways, sanitized aspects of culture, you know, that everybody can gather around. We all need food, we all like food. If it tastes good, that's fine, it brings us together. But I think in a very real way, it also does serve potentially to bring people together and not eradicate difference, but show that we're the same as we are different at the same time, which is that, I guess, the thing that anthropologists look at. Sorry,
I just had a question that came up into my mind, because I feel like it will pass on and then it wouldn't be relevant. I feel like just to answer it and ask it now. When you say like there are, where obviously we have different stage of integrating the people who, I'm just repeating it because some of the students, they don't know about it, is the ones that they keep their culture and they keep a resistance and say, no, I'm not going to integrate. The other ones say like, I will bring half of it and half no, and I say no, just pretend I was here all the time and make that the other society and keep yourself away. And the other one, which is the best one, is that integrate together. I'm good, you're good, we are coexisting together. And the worst one is like, no, you're the other, I'm not getting engaged. But the ones who you referred to that were presenting the reform politics, it was interesting for me. How did they see themselves after noticing that there are common ground with the other groups, other people that they are calling them the others? What happened then? What was his reaction or her reaction?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular case, I don't know, we discovered afterwards, actually, that this particular person was a member of this party. But I mean, I think, as I said, it reflected a kind of politics, and again, I'm making assumptions here, but I think it reflects a particular kind of politics that's very much mainstream in India. And if you're a high caste Hindu, which does see yourself perhaps as other, not other as a South Asian in relation to, for example, the white British population, but you see yourself as other as a British Hindu in opposition perhaps to Muslim migrants to Britain, or other kinds of migration to Britain. And perhaps having been here, being in the UK and being established, potentially against other forms of migration. I mean, I don't want to put words in somebody's mouth, having not spoken to them, but I think it just shows that those kinds of integration, I mean, it's a very complex matter. Particularly because in this case, that person had not been in the UK, you know, for decades. Perhaps they've been here for probably less than a decade. So the outcome of, you know, a Reform Party in government might not necessarily be the kind of outcome that they would necessarily want, I imagine. But
exactly, it was a very unique stand.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it is so unique, actually. I think that there are those sorts of distinctions. And I think we were particularly interested in it in the area where we were working that had seen quite a lot of migration from South Asia. I mean, this wasn't in Southall. This was further out, kind of into the Green Belt, where you'd had people migrating from South Asia at different stages. So you had the people that Luke was talking about in these waves of post-war migration, often working class Mirpuri Pakistanis with a kind of chain migration coming to work in factories, filling those low-paid jobs that had been left empty after the war, being very much engaged in building the British economy, who were mostly Muslim. And later, these more recent waves of skilled labour, skilled in the sense of often in IT and engineering and so on, moving out from those other places, and often a second generation actually from places like Southall, who might be moving outwards into those greenbelt areas, those other areas, which are perhaps more affordable than living in central London, which are in that commuter belt, and becoming engineers, IT specialists, coming out to benefit in particular from the education system in some of those counties, but are seen in many ways by a white population as being all part of this same group. They're all migrants, they're all South Asians, when in fact they come from very different parts of, well, often geographically not so different actually, if you're from the Punjab or you're from on the Pakistan side of the border, but places which are conceived of as being very different from one another. And they would see themselves often as very different from one another. And I think that that's perhaps what you have and what you see in that the person who had become a reform candidate in a local council election, for whatever reason, I'm not entirely sure, but which I think is surprising from looking in from the outside. But if you're part of those communities and you're seeing those differences that people themselves perceive between those other groups, yes, it becomes more understandable, I think, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Well,
it depends on which window you're looking at, from inside to out or outside inside.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I understand that.
And the various windows in between. I don't want to overdo the metaphor.
I think that's one of the issues that is dealing with. We have to ask Dr. Azad about it. Like when we want to bridge between these rivers, if we can call them, that they are different aspects, and you want to highlight it, that this kind of situation, this kind of identity exists and is affecting the politics, how we have to behave, how we have to prevent it. That's another issue that we are dealing with as well. But before we go on, Luke, did you want to say something, or your hand was just...
Oh, no, yeah, I was going to come in on James's point there, but I would much prefer to hear from Professor Azad. Okay. And we can maybe chat afterwards.
Yeah. And I also mentioned one person during this discussion, like Zia Yusuf. Arif Azad might know him. He was the chairperson of the Reformist Party in Pakistani migrant, isn't
it? Yes, I mean, Zia Yusuf is, I think, Sri Lankan origin.
Oh, he is Sri Lankan origin.
Yeah, but there was another one, Ben Habib. He was... I think he was with the Reform Party. I'm not sure he's with, Reform Party now, but he led the charge for, Reform Party and UK independence in early stages. He was from Pakistan.
Okay.
Yes, originally. And I think while James and, Luke were making the point about like entrepreneurs and others. And Ben Habib is a businessman, and he made his money, through business, circles. And he was the first, person of South Asian origin, who became prominent, in the far right politics. So, and he often, pops up on, question times from time to time. Yes, very articulate, and so.
So is it the time for now, at this age, how we have to stand our point, how we have to present ourselves?
But I suggest Arif Azad has slides to present. And
there are slides, and I think we will go over, because since James and Luke talked about integrations, and you began as well. Yeah, I didn't know it was the key thing, but I will try to bring that in as well.
But you can present any way you want. We will describe it accordingly.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Can you? So it is my turn, or? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. Great. Yes, I mean, thank you very much for yes, I mean, inviting me, and absolutely, I mean, delighted to be having this opportunity to talk about South Asian migration experience.
Thank you.
So the title of my talk is South Asian Migration, Politics, Lived Experience, and I mean, Migrant Struggles. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, I think because we, like the last discussion point was about reform. So I thought we should, I mean, begin from what's happening now, what is the politics, what are the narratives around immigrations. And I think when we go into these, we will be able to shed some light on the implications of like current narrative, current discourse on integration as well. And I will, I mean, try to shed light on that as well. Yes, the first point, in migration has become a hot political issue across Europe and the UK. Yes, we see it also in America, particularly after the election victory of, the Trump. It has gained like huge political, I mean, salience. I mean, in Europe, we see the tightening of immigration, like rules, Denmark and everywhere, and also the language of like, the European Commission is also changing. I will discuss that. So, I mean, this is also linked with, I mean, progressively, I mean, restrictive, like immigration policy. I mean, Luke talked about it. I mean, 1962 Commonwealth Immigration Act and then 1968. I think the most important thing is, the label and, I mean, categories of, the migrants which have been used over time. And I think these categories have served to other, I mean, migrants as a whole. This is a process of othering. And I mean, these labels have also been not very helpful to the process of integrations. I mean, if you see the terminology over the years, it began with, I mean, like, I mean, migrants which were officially invited into England after the Second World War through work voucher scheme. Then it was, the labor, and also plus like, I mean, skilled workers in NHS, in, I mean, transport and others, as Luke has mentioned. Then we see in the 70s and 80s a lot of, I mean, different labels being described to these people, and also like, I mean, differentiate, I mean, different, I mean, categories of migrants from, refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, boat people. I think this language was not only, I mean, dehumanizing, it had also the impact of like bonding, like, I mean, bonding the bond of, solidarities between, I mean, migrant communities. And it had its effect not only on the integration, but also for the migrant, I mean, struggles in this country, because they seem to have been, I mean, divided along, different categories. For example, the people who became, I mean, British citizens before this term, asylum seekers and economic, I mean, migrants came to be used. They, thought of themselves as, I mean, superior, I mean, citizens, or sort of like, I mean, superior migrants. And I mean, we also seems to see, the categories. There are some good migrants, some bad migrants. And I think the migrants coming from South Asian communities or the Muslim communities from the Middle East, they were seen as a sort of, like not welcoming of them. And I mean, they were sort of like, the whole term, the Pakis and others in the 70s that was used. And then in the Daily Mail, the terms like, Landistan and others. I mean, these were sort of, the code words for like hostile environment for, a particular community. And I'm sure this had, some effect. And I mean, this has been going on and it has got worse in recent years. Because like after, reforms performing well in the polls, yes, all the major, parties are outdoing each other on migrant bashing. And it has gone to the extent that even, Labour Party Keir Starmer last speech, like Islands of, Strangers had a direct echo of, Enoch Powell, speech that we will feel, strangers in this country or others. Though he has regretted the use of this term, but I think this says a lot about what is going on in the politics and the policy and this hostile environment, which is amplified through media and the political like parties. And I mean, this will have effect. I mean, the recent legislative changes around indefinite leave to remain and others. I think that will have effect on on the integrationist agenda as well in the long term. And all the parties are going, backwards to, satisfy the stridently anti-migrant agenda of the Reform Party. Yes, next. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, I think, yes, Luke has, touched upon it. I will be very, brief. Yes, migration was, from the Commonwealth countries was encouraged by the British government to kickstart the post-war reconstructions. Yes, 1948 Nationality Act sort of, facilitated the migrations. But as soon as this process happened, yes, local, hostility to migration also grew. And, the wind, yes, in particular in 1959 were the first rate riots. And they seem to be in, direct reaction to the wind rush, like boat that landed in Britain. And since then, yes, politicians and political parties have tried to control the flow of, the migrants through 1962 Act and 1968 Act. And after that, there have been many. Of course, the purpose of each is to control, yes, the flow of, migrants, to satisfy, like, the organizations like, National Front First, and then the, like a UK Independence Party and others. And I think in the 90s, we see the whole migration, debate came to settle on numbers. And I think one of the key organizations which played a big role in that was, Migration Watch, and which began around, the 2000, looking at the numbers. And since then, like, political, debate has been about the numbers. David Cameron saying, I will get the migration numbers down by 100 thousands and others. So, which he didn't, succeed. But, the recent numbers about, yes, more than, 1 million has, caused a lot of panic, and we see that number being used and excused to restrict, migration controls further. But having said that, there are efforts at, yes, improving, race equality and, the race relationships, and also improving the rights atmosphere for, migrants. And we see the Race Relation Act of 1968, and also the Macpherson report around the killing of, Stephen Lawrence. So these were like ameliorative, acts in the direction of, the rights and equality and others. Yeah. Next, please. Just Pakistani Indian migration, or the South Asian migrations. I think even before the first Nationality Act of 1948, there were Indian workers working in England, and the first Indian the Indian Workers Association came to be formed in 1934 or 39, I think it is. But after the Second World War, I think the first wave of Pakistani migration was in the 50s. As a result of appeal from like Harold Macmillan, government, they actively recruited from the ex-colonies. And in Pakistan in those days, everybody in Pakistan could not access, passports and others. And the first wave of, Pakistani migration was linked to the displacement of people who were, displaced as a result of, the Mangla Dam in Punjab. And a lot of those, displaced people, most of them of, Kashmiri origin, they were given, passports for the first time as an inducement to leave their land. And they can go to Britain, where it's, demand for labor. So in a way, passports were given as an inducement and confessions. And I think the depiction of this whole, process has been done very well by, Tariq Mahmood, who is a Pakistani activist and Pakistani writers, I think, who lives in Manchester. I will talk more about his fiction. Yes, migrations from, the Bangladesh, again, was mostly from Sylhet, which is, the rural areas. That was, largely these, migrants were from the rural areas. And I think most of this, first wave of Pakistani migrants went to the northern countries. They were employed in the factories, the cotton factories, Ford and others. I think Southall was, largely dominated by, migrants from from India. And they were employed in local factories and Heathrow airports as well. Yes, in the 90s and 80s, we see a different type of, migration. Students, doctors, political, refugees, and more people coming from urban settings in Pakistan. Yeah. Next, please. Okay, I'll just, spend a little bit of time on these early generations, struggles for their rights and their rights to fair pay and economic, integration, basically. Um, so, basically, yes, early struggles were around, workplace condition, wages, trade union memberships. And I think women were very active in that front because the first major, strikes was in, Grunwick, dispute of 1976. This was, Imperial Typewriter Factory, where Indian workers, mostly of East African origin. So there were, the poor working condition, yes, no trade union recognitions and others. So this led particularly Asian women to lead the strike, which lasted about, 2-3 years, and which became the national headlines, and the politicians of both parties used to go to the site, engaging the, in strikers in saris. This was like one of the headlines, they used to describe the leaders of the Asian women, and strikers. And close to West London, from 1995 to 97, there was a big strike, Hillingdon Hospital strikes. Again, it was led by Asian women, mostly of Indian origin, but yes, for better working conditions and, the more pay. And I think these strikes came about when, privatization drive in NHS was at its earliest phase. And this lasted about, 2-3 years. Yes, at the beginning it was unofficial, strike, but then, Unison has to term the, strike as official. And when the Labour government came in 1997, Unison got cold feet on it, and they wanted the strike to end, but it went on for some time, but then it the fizzle out. Yes, in the northern countries, there was a, you can call this was the first generations, like Asians, or some of the Asians who had come as part of the families, and they were very young, like in their teens. They started campaigns against policing in particular, against the racism and others. So these Asian the movement were yes, there was a famous case, Bradford 12, which were the the 12 Asian youth were arrested by police while resisting the far right march in the city. And I think harsh, sentences were, meted out to them. Then they appealed, and this became a very big case. There is a vast, literature on this, like Anandi, Ramamurthy has done, yes, quite a lot of work around it. And then, in the South Hall, again, there was a big, the youth movement. And there was a big demonstration in 1977 when the far right intended to march in South Hall, and it was opposed by the Asian youth. And one activist, Blair Beach, Blair Peach of like, you know, I mean, New Zealand origin was killed, yes, I mean, during the riot. And again, Asian youth were, I mean, clapped up in prison and given harsh sentences. And so, I mean, there is like, you know, Channel 4, you know, I mean, documentary on this, you know, the very long, if you are interested. And again, the fictional, you know, I mean, depictions of these, you know, I mean, struggles you can find in, you know, I mean, Nadeem Aslam's novel, and also in, you know, I mean, Salman Rushdie's novel, you know, Satanic Verses, one chapter about London, LONDON. It fictionally talks about the South Hall, you know, I mean, struggles, though the setting is, you know, the Brick Hall, and all the characters, yes, who fought the legal battles, who fought in the streets or others, I mean, you can, you know, recognize them. Yes, next, please. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if there is any, like, I think the points I want to make that, you know, discourse around migration has been changing with, you know, progressive hardening of legislation and controls. And obviously, yes, you know, the current legislation, which is yes, being pushed through the Labour government in, you know, the recent time around this indefinite leave to remain, and I mean, increasing the like, you know, I mean, qualification period from 5 years to 10 years. I think these all measures have, I mean, implication for integrations and others. And I think the hostile environment, which was inaugurated by, you know, I mean, Theresa May, has got even, yes, more hostile with the passage of time. I think, you know, I mean, pro-migrant, yeah, yes, lobbies have been historically weak, so their capacity to change policy is very, you know, I mean, limited. Yet, I think there are still, you know, a lot of, I mean, campaigning groups and, you know, I mean, struggles around, I mean, migration and migrant rights and integrations have been going on. Yes, that is.
Thank you. Thank you for
yes,
your
me.
presentation.
I would love any, you know, in questions or the, you know, debate.
Yes. Before we tackle into the questions and the discussions, I think Mr. Dr. Luke want to add a point.
Hi, thanks. Thank you, Professor Azad. That was a really great presentation, and thank you for adding so much detail in there as well. It was really, I think people will really get a lot from listening back to that as well. I just very quickly, I think that you've made a really strong and striking historical kind of point about the situation that we're in today as well, how far things have come and how things have seemed to be moving almost full circle, and how, given this historical struggles, we're still seeing. So I've got a very loud truck outside the house.
We cannot hear it.
No.
Okay,
no,
great.
No,
that we're seeing, you know, the St George's crosses littering the lampposts across West London today. You know, it's quite astounding what's happening in the UK in this moment. And when the migration menu we did our live event at the Pitshanger Manor and Gallery with Deputy Mayor for Inclusion and Society Debbie Wicks Bernard, and she also pressed the point that, you know, anybody with any kind of platform needs to be kind of discussing the importance of stressing what we have in common, and not emphasizing so much what divides us.
Yeah, exactly.
But one of the points that I was going to make, I'm very sorry, I have to run for another meeting now, but one of the points I was going to make earlier was I was thinking of that the distinction made between groups of emigre of various first generations and people who've come to the UK now versus people who came earlier often has a very kind of recognition of that difference can have a very negative inflection. But from the work that Priest has been doing with, say, for example, the Farsi Action and the groups of Afghan women that have come over now, there's an incredible amount of solidarity in recognizing that disadvantage of people who've come more recently after 2021, and the amount of work that needs to go in and the sort of peer support for that. So I think there is another kind of another picture there as well, rather than just recognizing difference and distinction, also finding solidarity. So on that point, I'm going to have to say thank you so much to the organizers, and thank you, Professor Azad and James as well, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
You.
Have a
Thanks
good
again.
meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, James, did you want to say something?
Only I was just thinking in relation to the word solidarity, and in relation to some of those examples that Dr. Azad was giving about the strike at Hillingdon Hospital going back. There was the big strike at I think it's the Arwolf rubber factory in Southwold for equal wages, and how those solidarities were actually often class kind of solidarities, which cross-cut differences that you had then. So you had
absolutely.
I think there was an effort, I think, by Arwolf to ship down Pakistani migrant workers who had been working in Manchester to come and do the jobs done by Sikh and Hindu workers in that factory at that time, who refused to do it. So I think you had those kind of solidarities, which perhaps in the present moment have become more fragmented. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but it does show hope of or ways in which to rebuild some of those solidarities, I think, and recognize those class differences that we all share, whether we're, whatever color we are or whatever our backgrounds are. That was all. Thank you. But thank you. That was a really interesting presentation.
Thank you very much.
Recognize some of those things as well when we have those interviews with restaurateurs who tell those stories, but they tell very personal stories, but they're always against that background of Southall from the 60s onwards very often, and their family stories are really kind of integrated into that, those bigger stories that are going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Azad, I wanted to thank you personally because of the presentation. We didn't get the time. I had a message from Luke, he needed to go, so I wanted to make sure that I'm appreciating your presentation. I learned a lot. This was insightful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
No, it's a pleasure. And I just had a question. Do you think if we want to evaluate, because I know it's not like just a simple answer, but can we say migrating to UK, it's become harder nowadays? And is it we have to stop ourselves and say, what is it that we need to do? Are we have to focus on the ones who are already here, or are we going to focus on the ones who are coming? Which one are more triangable? Which one is more sensitive to help with?
I think on, the both fronts work is needed, because early settlement, the people who come to this country, they need, support, structures in the early phases. So they need, support. That is important too. But the people who are already there, it is in a way different. They don't need the early support, which is, required for the newly arrived. But I think it also depends upon people who are here already, how they make efforts to integrate. One, this is, the personal. How, political and, the local level, environment is, pro-integration, and others, the policies and support. And I think the best way to integrate, I will just give you, my example. My way of integration into the British life was through politics. And if you get engaged in politics, then you get to know, yes, the society, its structures and the different thing, then the chances of integrations are greater. Yeah, that is my short answer. I don't know whether I've answered it fully, but
yes,
that is just off the top of my head.
You think we have a call in the politics? We can take power and take action by it.
Even if yes, the mainstream parties are opening at the local level. But I'll just tell you. But the recent even Labour Party has started to ditch Muslim candidates in some areas under pressure from reform's higher poll rating. And in Hounslow, yes, in the recent month, last 2 weeks, most of the candidates, non-white candidates have been deselected. I think they won't be able to stand next time. So this is also a bit the worrying that the politics remains a good way in, and if the mainstream parties are not making effort to involve you in politics, for fear of antagonizing the far right surge or to stopping it. That's actually worrying on the other hand.
Thank you for your answer. We have questions in the chat, I believe. Sorry, I have to look into it.
In fact, there are many.
Oh, is it? So do you want to, guys, do you want to open your mic and ask your questions? Just bring your hand so we can read them by one.
So Mark, questions are many. So Mark, you can ask 2 questions only among these 5 questions. Yeah, because
it doesn't come for me. I just
it's in the chat. It's in the
chat. There from the chat. Yeah.
I may not relate the question. What is your view on generalizing and how we can reduce it within community?
Sorry, say that again. I didn't get it.
He's asking what is generalization and how we can reduce it within community.
What is
generalization?
I'm
not really understand his point.
I think when you read, sorry, I'm just reading it down. He then talks, how do we encourage people to see others as individuals rather than categories? So I guess it's maybe thinking about seeing people as part of a big group rather than seeing them as individuals.
No. So that's my reading of it. Okay, that's your that's what I'm saying, that yes, like labeling of people or categories in a particular immigration, based on your immigration status, and encouraged by immigration control policies, and then amplification of these labels and categories is is not good either. Yes, for the migrants or the host community, because ultimately this damages the process of integration, be it economic, be it the cultural and others. So I am against these labels. these all 8, 10, 9 labels which have been invented and then discarded as the need for new labels arose. Just to beat back the far right or anti-migrant groups.
So thank you for your answer. Is again asking about the question, coming back to it, is saying a need to strengthen education around critical thinking and cultural understanding, especially in a diverse country like the UK. What with the pros and cons of students? I think what he's referring to is, what if we create awareness of we are not that different and we bring a common ground?
Yeah.
Would that be effective?
No, I think, yes, you know, I mean, bringing people together and it is always, yes, rather than, I mean, encouraging, you know, I mean, divisive label, you know, I mean, divisive politics. I think, I mean, bringing people through, you know, in cultural activities, through education, through politics, and also the politics that, you know, I mean, brings, yes, people together and not, you know, I mean, divisive. Yes, I mean, for example, you know, I mean, Notting Hill Gate, this, you know, the festival, what it's called, Notting Hill Gate.
Notting Hill Festival, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carnival, sorry.
Yes,
Right.
Carnival. It, you know, arose out of the 1951, and yes, I'm 50, yes, I mean, 9 Notting Hill Gate riots, race riots. So some of people came together and they you know, set up this, you know, I mean, initiative to bring people together around music, around cultural activities. And I think that has, I mean, huge impact. It is, you know, I mean, still going. Just the people who were, you know, I mean, initially involved, like, I mean, Claudia Jones and others. I mean, they were, you know, I mean, yes, amazing thinkers, organizers, you know, I mean, writers. And I mean, they believed in, 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 you know, I mean, solidaristic bonds rather than, you know, I mean, divisive politics. And I mean, that says a lot about just the politics of, I mean, bringing people together around, just around, you know, the culture and also there, yes, you know, the think tanks can be set up, also academic, I mean, initiative like yours.
Yes.
It can build understanding among,
That was
you
one
know,
of
I mean,
our
communities.
intentions as well.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your input. Yes, that was one of our intentions, because we believe in, if we are sharing experience, it will
Yeah.
allow us to understand each other through
Yeah.
humans. That
Yeah.
connection makes our communicating better in a deeper level. One
Yeah.
of the questions that they have in the chat box is, do you have any recommendation for resources, any of you, for studying the history of migration and understanding them? Any channels, YouTube, anything that a blog maybe, that it help our interns to understand deeper level?
I think, yes, you know, I mean, Channel 4, you know, in documentary I mentioned on, you know, the South Hall. I also mentioned, you know, Anandi, you know, in Ramamurthy's work on Asian youth movements. I think from, you know, and also, you know, the Sivanandan's work, race, this Race Relations Institute work. It has a lot of, you know, I mean, resources on immigrations. Yes, I mean, BBC has, yes, I mean, some interesting, you know, I mean, resources in terms of history. And also Oxford Refugee Center. They do a good work around, you know, migration numbers and also the facts and, you know, I mean, myths about, you know, in migrations. In terms of podcast, I think the recent, you know, I mean, documentaries by David Ogiulosa, or, you know, I
haven't heard that.
Yes, you know, the second name, I hope yes, I'm getting it.
James, do you know the podcast?
Yes, it is called Empire or something, but because Empire is also linked to, you know, I mean, migration, and I mean, Luke also mentioned at the beginning how this migration is linked to empire as well. So it would be important to see migration in the context of empire and, you know, the Commonwealth politics and whole. I think these are, yes, important.
Yes, Thank you.
Yes, I
very
mean,
much.
Sivanandan's work is very important, I
Yes.
think.
Well, we have the migration menu as well, which I think
Okay.
the students, yes, James and Luke are co-hosting it, and I'm one of the fans, and I listen to it. It's not just about the food that brings the cultures together, but the little histories that we learn about them
Mhm.
continuously, a little steps. It will
Yeah,
help
it
you to
helps.
understand.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you for your
Thank you.
input.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, is there any questions that our audience would like to open their mics and ask? No?
Yeah, I suggest we should conclude the session because it's
Okay.
12:17. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, James and Luke and other. We should remain in touch, and I would like to be more.
Thank you. We
Yeah,
More
would
involved.
appreciate
Visit
it.
us,
thank you.
Bruna.
Thank you. Too.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Doctor,
Yeah.
visit us, Bruna.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, thank you very much. Just thank you for inviting me, and yes, I
We
enjoyed the
really
conversation.
appreciate it. I really appreciate it because I'm working on migration. I'm working on the woman's identity, Iranian woman's identity in UK.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I would
That
like
be
to
interesting.
know much more about it and have a more discussion in depth.
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering if we would be able to have you more in our sessions, because as you can see, we have the interns who are interested in knowing more in depth about the South Asian and integration.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
Thank you
everyone
very
for
much.
being here. Thank you, James.
Thank you,
Collaborations.
James, and
We really
yes, thanks,
appreciate it.
Zishan.
Now we
Okay,
understanding
bye.
this process.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank
You,
you.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.